good portion of you. I'm going to say majority of you. So thanks for coming. So we're going to talk about the women of Butte today. And as Kim mentioned, I'd love it if you would share women that you think are important in Butte history. Because I feel like I'm just touching the surface, and I know there's a few that I left out that I wish I had time to put in, but life happens and I didn't. So I'm hoping that you will share some of your favorite women when we're done. Sorry, the arrows really confuse me. The down arrows. So the reason I wanted to do this was in October we hosted a film screening, for the story of us, the women who shaped Montana. Did anybody come to that? Yeah, thank you. It was really great. It also aired on PBS over Thanksgiving weekend, and you can now get onto pbs.org and you can watch it there. But we watched it and I was like, oh man, I am so inspired. These women are so amazing. We should tell more about the women of Butte. You know, so frequently the men are spoken about, but the women are kind of pushed to the wayside. So just wanted to share some of those stories today. Katie? So the first 3 stories I have are actually pretty tragic, but then it's going to just go up from there. But they are important stories that I felt like should be told because tragedy happened frequently here in Butte, as we all know, with mining disasters in particular. The first one I wanted to mention was Minnie Cameron. She was born in 1872 and she married Fire Chief Angus Cameron. They had 6 children in total together. And beginning in January 1895 is when the tragedy started in her life. They had twins, and one of the twins passed away on January 13th, 1895. Kim's like, what? Yeah, see, her story grows. And as many of you know, on January 15th, 1895, Fire Chief Angus Cameron and the rest of the crew were called out to a fire at the Canyon Connell warehouse. They got there, it exploded, and Fire Chief Cameron, along with 12 other men, were killed on site that night. Shortly after that, Minnie started the legal fight, saying that she was owed because of her husband's death. When her husband died, she was pregnant with their last child that she did not know yet she was pregnant with. He would be later born, and his name was Angus, after his father.
Wait. She had twins on the 13th?
No, not twins on the 13th. They were born the year before. One of the twins died January 13th, and her husband died January 15th. So I'm sorry about that.
Wait.
Whoa, how is she pregnant after
that? That is not possible.
So I apologize.
Okay.
But little Angus would die later at age 7 of blood poisoning. She later left Butte and moved to Washington, continuing her legal fight. And she was one of the few families that actually ended up with enough money that she was set for life after that disaster. She died at age 77 and she never remarried. But here they are. Angus Cameron, he has a great mustache. If any of you have visited our sculpture of him, that mustache is very prominent.
Who were the other people in the picture?
Sorry, they were all Minnie Cameron throughout different phases of her life. So Madge Dugan O'Connor, she was born in 1896, in Oregon, and she moved to Butte when she was quite young. She married Manus Dugan in 1915, and many of you are familiar with the story of Manus Dugan. He's considered one of the major heroes of the Granite Mountain mine fire that took 168 lives, his as well. He didn't make it out, and I feel her story is important because there were so many other similar stories like this. Hers is probably the most well-known. She had his child, a little girl, 27 days after he perished in this fire, and she named her child Manus, who would then go on to name her child Manus. There's a series of Manuses in this family. Madge Dugan continued on with her life, and I didn't know this until recently. She ran for the office of public administrator, and she won in 1918. She ran again in 1920 and won again. She later remarried to a man named Tim O'Connor in 1907. She operated her own dressmaking shop. She passed away in 1965, and she's buried between both of her husbands out at St. Patrick's Cemetery. any of you attended the cemetery talk I gave, somebody else was buried between their two wives, and they called it a wife sandwich. So she's in a husband sandwich. I just said that one for Abby because she thought that was hilarious. So, but here's Madge and her daughter Manus. Mabel Foster Clark. Once again, if you went to the cemetery tour, you heard this as well. But Mabel Foster Clark was born to John and Mary Foster in 1881 in Pennsylvania. And then they came to Butte shortly afterwards, and she would go on to be married to W.A. Clark Jr. Interestingly, their engagement was announced on January 1st, 1901. They married in June 1901. And then she gave birth to their son, who was dubbed the $1 Million Baby on December 1st, 1902. And he was W.A. Clark's first grandson, and he was given $1 million upon his birth. 1902. That's a good chunk of change. I mean, I'd be okay with that right now. So I can only imagine in 1902. She fell ill after delivering him, and she died New Year's Day, once again, 1903. And she really piqued my interest when we were doing the tour, because there's the Foster family plot out there, and it's beautiful, and it has the parents and her two sisters and and their husbands, I believe, and then a tombstone for her. But she's not actually buried there. She was buried there, and then in 1921, her husband had, I guess, his family mausoleum completed in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and it's on an island. And he had her moved down there. So she is in the mausoleum with him, their son, who died at a young age as well, and his second wife. Sandwich.
Another
Another sandwich. You guys guessed it. But I just thought that was kind of a fascinating story. Has anybody ever been to that Hollywood Forever Cemetery? It's really kind of fascinating. I've never been there, but there's so many cool little bits down there. Yeah.
I think
So.
the kid, William?
What?
Sorry, we're on.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
The silent table up here.
It's a silent vote.
Silent. So the Women's Protective Union. In June of 1890, the Butte Daily Reminder reported, "The ladies of Butte, God bless them, are not going to be behind their brothers in demanding their rights." And they formed the Women's Protective Union at that time. It started with 33 women, and at its peak in 1955, it had 1,149 women. And they had everything from the bucket girls that packed lunches at the boarding houses for the miners, to hospital maids, waitresses, car hops. If you were a woman in a working position, you were probably going to be recruited to be part of this. In 1903, they affiliated with the American Labor Union. 1905, they affiliated with the International Workers of the World, IWW, which is still in existence today. In 1909, they aligned with the Hotel and Restaurant Employees International Union, but they still retain their name of the Women's Protective Union here in Butte. And as a union, as they do with all other unions, right, they negotiated better wages, hours, they provided sick time, vacation time, and then they also provided classes for these women on like child rearing and that kind of stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. In 1973, they merged with the cooks and waiters to form the Culinary Miscellaneous Workers Union number 457, and that was the end of the Women's Protective Union here in Butte.
What's that logo or emblem that they have hanging from the?
You know, I don't know.
Is that like a pie
Right
server
here?
or a?
It is a pie server, Jim.
I don't.
Can I kick him out? Is that?
Okay, we're giving you the yellow card.
So on to, they were a trailblazing group, right? So now I'm going to talk about some trailblazing women on their own. We have Clara Clark and Isabel Little. This is Clara and Isabel. Clara Clark was born in 1880 in Butte. Her father was a miner, and he had a mining claim called the Black Rock. You guys might recognize that. We just did a major exhibit on it. And he sold it to the Butte and Superior Mining Company and made a pretty penny on it, so they were doing pretty well. Clara was the first student registered at the Montana State School of Mines. Pretty cool. Yeah. There was the first graduating class in 1903, men only. By 1904, her, one other woman, Isabel, and 8 men graduated. A quote from her was, "They were the closest possible friends and the greatest help and encouragement to one another." When she graduated, she led the effort to start the Montana School of Mines Alumni Association, which is still present today as a Montana Tech Alumni Association. There was 11 founding members, and she went to work as a consulting engineer after graduation. She had a good reputation in her field and was known as Montana's Queen of the Mountains. In 1905, she attended the American Mining Congress Convention and became a lifetime member. In 1907, she married Herbert Reese in Butte, and then they would eventually move around the country, and she died in California in 1959. Her classmate, Isabel, was born in Baltimore, and she moved to Butte at age 17. Her parents came out here. Her parents went back to Baltimore, but she enjoyed it here so much that she decided to stay, and she lived with her aunt. She took a math class at the Montana School of Mines to beat boredom, and she decided she enjoyed it so much that she would enroll. She was at the top of her class when she graduated. Their studies took them into the Ophir, the Never Sweat, and the Calusa Parrot, and all the while, early 1900s, these women were wearing long gowns. You guys have seen those shoes. Pretty wild outfits, and they're down in the mines doing that. She graduated with honors, and during her time she met a man named Leon Stevenson. He would graduate the next year, and they married, and they moved to Bourne, Oregon, where he worked for a mining firm, and she became the stay-at-home wife. They then moved around together. I last found her working in Virginia at the Federal Reserve Bank, and she died in 1936 in Virginia. Ella Knowles Haskell. She was born in 1860 in New Hampshire. She graduated in 1884 from Bates School. She moved to Salt Lake. She became a teacher, and then she moved up to Helena. She worked as a secretary for a lumber company, and then she became a principal. She decided this wasn't what she really wanted to do with her life, so she said, "I want to be a lawyer." Women couldn't practice law in Montana at that time, so she lobbied against the state, and a bill was passed in 1889 allowing women to be lawyers, and by January 1890, she was the first woman to pass the bar here. She was also the first woman in the nation to run for state attorney general. She did that in 1892. She lost to a man named Henry Haskell, who was so impressed with her that he asked her to come work for her. That worked out. They married. They married, but he later wanted to move elsewhere, and she didn't, so they divorced in 1902. So good for her. Strong, independent woman. Shortly after that, she moved to Butte. She worked on mining cases. At one point, she was paid $10,000, which was the largest amount ever paid to a female attorney by that time. She died in 1911 at age 50. And if you go out to Mount Moran Cemetery where she's buried, she has a beautiful headstone. It's huge. And it only has her last name on it. It doesn't have her date of birth or her date of death. Gina Beth made that remark in her book, so kind of interesting.
It just says Haskell?
Just says Haskell. So here she is, obviously, and she lived in the Napton, which is just right over there. And, I should have blown it up bigger. There's 2 women walking here. And this was taken early 19-teens. I like to pretend that's her. Dr. Caroline McGill, she's my favorite. I'm trying to convince my daughter to be her for Halloween. I don't know how it's gonna go. But she has a thing for being strong, independent women for Halloween, so maybe. Dr. McGill was born in 1879 in Ohio. She graduated with the first doctoral degree to a woman from University of Missouri. She came to Butte in 1910 to work at the Murray Hospital, which was just situated right down the block from us. And when she came here, she's quoted as saying, she told her parents it was the biggest fool mistake of her life.
I know the feeling.
It obviously wasn't. She ended up staying here for a majority of the rest of her life. She was the first pathologist in Montana, as well as the first female physician. She left for a couple of years to further her studies at Johns Hopkins, and then went to the Mayo Institute. She returned in 1913. In 1919, she bought the building across the street from the Murray Hospital, which is still standing. It had tunnels connecting the buildings. It had nurses living there. and she lived on the top floor, and she also opened a clinic, and she treated all walks of life there. Often bartering with people. If they couldn't pay, she would take payment in forms of whatever they could possibly provide her, which was great because she started recognizing that things were no longer sticking around. She kind of started to collect them. And I'm going to come back to that. In 1936, she bought the 320 Ranch in Gallatin Canyon. And with these items, she started stockpiling them over there. And then she decided she wanted to create a museum. She acquired so many little trinkets and such that Montana State University in Bozeman provided her with 3 Quonset huts, and she was allowed to store everything in there. And she continued practicing medicine until 1956, and then in 1957, the Museum of the Rockies opened. So how many of you have been to the Museum of the Rockies? Yes, great. When you go in, their main entrance there's a small plaque dedicated to her. And they used to have a nice exhibit about her. Well, last time when I was there last year, it wasn't there anymore. But now you know. Everything can be traced back to Butte.
Everything.
That's fine.
Center of the universe.
You knew her? Get out.
Well, she was in that building.
Yeah.
Her office was on the main floor,
Yeah.
and Dr. Schwartz was in there, and he was our family doctor.
Oh, wow.
So,
You knew her?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's cool.
I think she's just the coolest. So cool. She died in 1959 at age 79. Here she is, so that last photo, she was quite a bit younger. Here she is, older, riding her horse at her ranch.
Is she buried on a ranch?
She's buried in Gallatin Canyon, not on her ranch, like in a cemetery of sorts.
Oops.
So, speaking of her again, here's Dr. McGill getting her portrait painted by Elizabeth Lockery.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Elizabeth Lockery, how many of you are familiar with her? Maybe some of you have a painting of hers? Maybe? No? Oh, I thought for sure somebody would. Oh.
Wayne should have.
Wayne should have one. Elizabeth Lockery was born Elizabeth Davy in 1890 to Frank and Mary Davy in Deer Lodge. She graduated from the Pratt Art Institute in 1911, which is in New York City. She really had a thing for painting Native Americans. She was fascinated with them and their culture, she said, from the time she was little. You think 1890, Native Americans are still present in this area. And she had a quote in the newspaper at one point saying she wanted to run away and be an Indian. I thought that was interesting. And she started painting them in adulthood, and she formed a really close relationship with the Blackfoot tribe. And she was made a member of the Blackfoot tribe in 1931. She was given the name, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to ruin it, but it meant woman alone in her way. She was Montana's first woman to give a one-woman art show in New York City, and she also represented Montana at the New York World's Fair. If you want to see her art, she has public art murals in Dillon at the post office, and also 2 post offices in Idaho. I meant to write those down, I apologize, I forget where. She died in 1981 in California. She moved down there to be with her daughter, but she is buried in Deer Lodge. But, you guys are familiar with her work, but you can see this is her painting and sculpting in her art studio. Uh-oh, I lost my place. That's not good. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. So, Alma Higgins. Alma Mae Higgins was raised in Deer Lodge, Montana. Those Deer Lodge people, they like to come here. She came to Butte in 1946. And at this time, or not 1946, at the age of 46, and the time she came here, Butte was dubbed by Time magazine as the ugliest town in the world. So that was a big deal. But Alma was staunchly against that, and she was going to beautify Butte. That was her mission. She was active in 18 different gardening clubs, planting trees, designing gardens. She founded Garden Week in Butte in 1922, and it became national, and it's still practiced today. This year it is June 4th to June 10th, so, which is a great time to plant in Butte. My grandpa always told me, don't do it before June 1st. So, She became known as the nation's Christmas tree leader for efforts of promoting living Christmas trees.
Later,
Let's see here. So here's a living Christmas tree, and then she would take it and she would plant it in her yard later. She lobbied and oversaw the planting of a live Christmas tree at the White House during the presidency of Calvin Coolidge. The original tree burned down due to the heat of incandescent lights. Thank God for LED these days. So they replanted it, and it still stands. She lived at the Montana Hotel right on Broadway there off of Montana Street.
That's a piece of it right
Yeah. And this is now a parking lot, which is terrible when I tell you the next thing. So she died in 1962 at the Montana Hotel where she lived. And if you go here today, there is the Covalite Theater Presbyterian Church before that. And there's a little plaque over here that says garden dedicated to Alma Higgins. So the fact that it's a parking lot
Yeah.
just kind of kills you a little bit.
But the public library is hoping to do a restoration.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's in the idea stage,
Okay.
hoping to happen.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, interesting. Rose Hum Lee. So, Rose Hum was born in Butte in 1904 to Chinese immigrant parents. She was very smart. She went on to earn her bachelor's degree in sociology from the Carnegie Institute of Technology. She then went on to earn her doctorate in sociology at the University of Chicago. The Montana Standard reported Rose was the first American-born Chinese woman to teach sociology in an American college in 1945. And that's from this picture here. She wrote The Growth and Decline of Chinese Communities in the Rocky Mountain Region, which is still referenced today. She died in 1954. So. All right, Henrietta Bassett. So she was born Henrietta Curtis in Walkerville to David and Mary Curtis. She attended Blaine School. Any other Blaine? Yeah? No? No? Yeah.
1 year.
1 year. She went to Butte High and Butte Business College. She married a man named Charles Lees in 1906. They had 2 children during the length of their marriages. They married in 1906, divorced in 1911, remarried in 12, divorced in 15. So, pretty wild for that time frame. In 1912, she went to work at Hennessy's, where she worked until 1920 when she married Charles Bassett, who owned Bassett Printing. She was very active in politics, and she was a voting delegate at 2 political national conventions and a Democratic committee woman for 53 years. She was the first woman to file for a seat on the city council after the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. She lost that election, though, but that's all right. She attended her first national convention in 1928 when Al Smith was nominated as a Democrat, and she then attended in 1936 when FDR was nominated. Pretty exciting. She would die in 1981. Really classy one. Oh, wrong way. I'm going the wrong way. Oh, no, I got a little excited there.
Oh,
Sorry.
jeez.
Oh my goodness. Can't be trusted with technology.
Sure do.
So the Sisters of Charity. I'm hoping somebody else will talk about the other sisters because I feel like you guys will have better insight to that, and I didn't include them. The Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth came to Butte in the 1880s. They lived in a small cabin and solicited the all of Butte for money to establish a hospital in Butte. And it wasn't just the Catholics that contributed to this, but a lot of people did. And they had their hospital established in 1881. Beyond caring for patients, they also did all the cleaning and cooking as well as their daily prayers and rituals. The sisters were active in the community and added on to the hospital many times throughout their years here. And then a new one was built. How many of you were born in one of the St. James? Yeah? All right. They took over the Butte Community Hospital in 1961, formally moving all their operations there in 1962. And it is now Intermountain Health. So things are changing. Hopefully it's all right. Pictured today are the Sisters of Charity in 1962 enjoying dinner at the Meaderville Volunteer Fire Department. So Sarah McNeilis is right here. This is her sister Mary. Did anybody know them? Yeah. Sarah was born in Butte in 1912. And she grew up with her sisters Helen and Mary. Helen died at a young age, but her and Mary became very close, eventually living with each other in adulthood. Sarah went on to become a teacher, and she pursued her master's degree, and she decided to go into history, and she received it from the University of Montana. And she did her master's thesis on F. Augustus Heinze. And she did this because her father was the watchman at the Lexington mine when she was younger. And that was a Heinze mine at one point, and they had tons of stuff that belonged to Heinze. So she did it on that, for that reason. At this point, Heinze was long gone, but his brother Otto was still alive in New York. So she corresponded with him, and we actually have those letters here at the archives. So they're really cool. And she was able to gather invaluable information about that family that she wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. So she graduated with her master's degree in 1948. In 1951, K. Ross Toole, some of you might be familiar with him, he's a famous Montana historian, reached out to her and said, "We would love to publish part of your thesis in the first issue of the Montana, the Magazine of Western History." We actually have that issue here. And so she had a portion of it published, so that was pretty exciting. Toole loved her thesis so much that he pushed her to get it published as a book, and she did. And it's titled Copper King at War, the biography of F. Augustus Heinze. She continued teaching. Mary was a teacher too. They were both active in the teachers union. She retired in the late 70s, was a dedicated volunteer at the World Museum of Mining, and passed away at age 91 in 2003. In 2018, Zena Beth McGlashan, another great woman of Butte history, with the assistance of the Friends of the Butte Archives, actually republished that manuscript, and so you can buy it today. So pretty cool.
Anybody else write with that book?
Yeah. So Zena Beth and I wrote the afterword for that book.
Very good. Don't forget to add that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jim. Esther Judd. Some of you probably remember Esther Judd as well.
Yep.
She was born in 1915 to Simon and Sabina Zanin, is that how you say it? I don't know. In Browns Gulch. And they operated the Swiss Home Bar on East Mercury. They later moved to the New Deal Bar on South Arizona, and they lived above the bar. She attended Sacred Heart School and Butte Central Girls. She married Charlie Judd in 1942, and she met him because he was a bartender at the family New Deal Bar. Together they had 4 sons, and they would take over the New Deal Bar. So I didn't know that until I was researching Esther. It was her family bar, not Charlie's New Deal Bar, which everybody refers to it as. So, but that's all right. They took ownership of the bar and ran it until 2000. They're most famous for having their Halloween parties. Did anybody attend that? Oh, I love it. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So we have really great photos of that, and they were just known as really kind, loving people. And she passed away in 2006.
Candy there when you were a kid and you drank over there.
Yeah, it's just a good time all around. Right? This is how bars should operate today. So this isn't Butte, but it's close enough, right? Women didn't work in the mines here in Butte, but over in Anaconda, which you can't talk about Butte history without talking about Anaconda history, is my thought. Women did work in the smelter. Women were first allowed to work in the smelter during World War II. They were Montana's equivalent of Rosie the Riveter. And a lot of women wanted these jobs because it paid really well. This is a great quote. So a lot of people were concerned about the strenuous work that they were doing at the smelter, and one woman remarked, "It wasn't any more strenuous than housework." Like, amen to that, right? So the war ended, and the men returned, and the women, had to go back to their their housework. In 1950s, single women were allowed to work in clerical capacities, but if they married, they had to quit. By the 1960s, you could be married, but if you got pregnant, you had to quit. By the 1970s, women were allowed to work in all capacities, including actual smelter operations. And then it closed shortly after that. But, interesting.
Was that the women's fault?
Yeah.
Was that the women's fault?
You said they went to work there and shortly afterwards it closed.
Yeah, maybe it was the women's fault. That's probably it. That makes the most sense. A lot of you will remember this lady, Judy Jacobson. She moved here in 1973 from Indiana with her husband John and their children, and she wholeheartedly embraced the Montana lifestyle. She was on the first women's trap shooting team in Butte, and she also led many Girl Scout troops. In 1980, what she's best known for is her political career. In 1980, she was appointed to the Montana State Senate. She was the first woman to hold this position for Butte. She was reelected in 1982 and served until 1996. In this role, she was also the first woman to head finance and claims. In 2000, she ran and won Butte's chief executive race, and she was the first woman to hold this seat as well, and the only woman at this point. And in 2019, she passed away at the age of 80. What was that? Okay. Julia can correct me as I go. No. So Ellen Crane. We can't talk about amazing women without talking about Ellen Crane. So she was born and raised here in Butte to Kevin and Joan Shannon. She attended the Butte Catholic school system and graduated from Montana Tech. In 1990, she started here at the Butte-Silver Bow Public Archives as a director, and it was only a part-time position. The archives flourished, and now we're a world-renowned facility because of her. She did so many things for the archives and for Butte. She researched, wrote, and submitted the criteria that listed Butte and Anaconda as the largest national historic district in the United States. So pretty cool. Under her leadership, the archives successfully executed a $7.5 million project to build this room we're in now, as well as the rest of the building. And it had a 75% approval rate, which I think was a lot due to her, because she embraced and celebrated Butte's history, and people just love that. She was also spearheading the funds to purchase the C.O. and Smithers photograph collection with her staff, which a lot of these photos came from that collection that we're used today. She built relationships with Ireland and co-edited 3 books. She's received many awards. The most recently was the Governor's Humanities Montana Award, which is a really big deal. So here's the archives when she started. Look at those lovely garage doors and whatever this is, right? And here it is today. So, and here we are, the amazing women of the archives carrying on her legacy. So it was never intentional, but as of right now, it's a bunch of women that work here on staff. So we have Kim and me and Aubrey and Kara and Jennifer peeking out right here. So
That's good.
yeah. Now it's your turn. Would anybody like to share a story of amazing women?
Where are the women from the red light district?
Well, there you go, Jim. Why don't you tell us about your story? With the women of the Woodward.
I guess they weren't amazing.
They were?
I guess they weren't amazing.
There you go.
She's going to be. You didn't include Judy Marks.
Didn't include Judy Marks. I didn't. Tell us about Judy Marks. You don't know. Judy Marks is a born and raised Butte girl. She was in the Olympics, 1964. Does that sound right? She was Montana's first and only female governor. Anything else?
Miss Rodeo, Montana.
She was Miss Rodeo, Montana. I forgot about that. Yeah. I didn't include Judy Marks. March in hopes that somebody would say, "Who didn't play Judy March?"
Her mother ran the lunchbox down on Town Street.
Yours did?
Judy
Hers
Martin.
did. Does anybody want to share about their mothers?
There's an interesting story about McNeilis and the teachers union in Butte, and I think it's in the one book, and how the teachers union was formed in here. There wasn't a teachers union,
Right.
and during the Depression, you had a contract, and I had an aunt and my mother, they were both single, they were working in the school district, and the superintendents came back and said, well, there's two of you working here, so we're only going to pay each half wages. And so there were other women involved, and there were and McNeilis's came after that, but
Yeah, Mary McNeilis was the big part of that.
a big part of that.
Yeah.
And Mary McNeilis was part of it. They were the founding members, and so the young women, I think there were 3 men. They had them kind of as a token. And they formed the Butte Teachers Union, and so they started the union, and there's a lot of interesting parts in that book where they would have teas and different things to raise money, and then they formed the Teachers Union. But to me, the interesting part of the story is they weren't having much success, and it was winter, and in the winter, they went to the building trades in Butte, and they were all young gals, and they said, we need some help to get this off the ground. And so the operating engineers, who were the engineers in the schools, said, well, we'll see if we can help you. And they went to the board, that's who was controlling it, and then they went to the board and said, say those young girls want to form a union, and you don't seem to be working too well with them. And they said, well, no, we think we're treating them fair enough. Times are tough. We're treating them fair. And he said, well, let's talk about fair. It's December. It's cold. And if you don't treat those women right, there's not going to be heat in any school on Monday morning.
Oh. Yeah,
So that's how
it started.
That's how it started. So that's why they.
Wow. That's wild.
So it was a coordination, and then they went on to Butte Teachers Union, which is in effect today, had the first contract that was a designated contract of scale what they were going to pay in the country.
Oh, wow.
So
I didn't realize
and now
that.
that was a pattern, and once it was here, then it went around the country where they actually had a wage pattern designated in the contract.
Oh, that's cool. For a long time, women also were not allowed to be married if they were in a teaching
You had to
position.
quit. If you got married, you had to quit.
Uh-huh.
You see.
So it makes me wonder, like, is that why Sarah and Mary McNeilis never married? Because they just loved their
That's why
careers so much?
through our time, there were several, like the principal of Monroe,
Yeah.
they were never married because if they got married, they would have lost their jobs. And that's the only way they could end up as principal if they stayed
Right.
single. So there was a lot of women who didn't marry
Yeah.
because they would have to quit.
Right. Why? No.
Well, I've done some search about the public library, and just like he said with the teachers, the women that worked in the library had to be single or they had to quit. And I don't know as much as I wish I did, but there was a woman named Molly O'Meara who was the head of the circulation department for, I believe, about 30 years from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I was told by several people years ago that worked in the library that she ran the library. It didn't really matter who the director was. Nothing happened unless Molly O'Meara said it was good. And Molly was interesting too in that she was the roommate of, I'm forgetting the name. I'm forgetting the name. But her roommate was the maid in Lizzie Borden's house in Massachusetts.
Bridget Sullivan.
Bridget Sullivan, yes. And she lived with Bridget Sullivan, and anyway, Bridget moved out to Montana, and Molly and Bridget were housemates.
Yeah. Bridget Sullivan is now buried in Anaconda. Anybody else want to share a great Butte woman?
Jim, I have some information about the red light district.
Oh.
My husband's aunt was Beverly Snodgrass.
Oh,
And she came here from West Virginia, and her years here, she brought family and friends from West Virginia. The coal mines had shut down, go on strike, and she would bring families here, set them up in apartments, have school clothes, boots, whatever the kids needed for school, had a car and a job for the men they came. And she also, at Christmas, bought things for the Serotmus home. She bought the kids bicycles, clothes, dresses, coats. She had the girls at 14 South and 9 East Mercury going to college with her.
Oh, wow.
She paid for these girls to go to college and hopefully get a better life. She graduated from college in Boise, Idaho, and went to work out in Enumclaw, Washington. But she did a lot for Butte that was unknown, and she couldn't talk about it. And she used to buy the police department new uniforms every so often. It was a
I wonder why they do that.
It was a requirement, and she did. And that was Beverly Snodgrass.
You know, a lot of those women had bad reputations, but they had good hearts.
Some kids are named after.
You want to tell that story, Jim? No, okay. Toxic, you want to tell the story?
They're waiting for that. I don't, Margaret Larry, I don't know her story,
I don't know her story
but she's
either.
a pretty big name. in
Right.
the-
Does anybody
I
know
don't know
Margaret
her
Leary's
story.
story? I don't know her story, but the school is named after her.
She
We'll
ran
have to
the
do this
office
again
for
next
years.
year.
Ran the office at the school
She
district.
ran the office.
She ran the school district. She was the clerk over there
Yeah.
for years. I mean, you had to have the superintendent, but Margaret Larry was running the place.
Right. Like Molly O'Meara was running the library.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well,
anybody else?
oh,
I just have a question. Will you be doing another cemetery tour?
we will. Yes.
Same
I
place or
heard-
different place? Different.
Oh, we're thinking a different cemetery this year. I heard early September. Yeah.
You may have to do a couple.
I'd be okay with that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Very good. Good job.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank
We'll
you,
have to do this
Lindsay.
again next year and talk about Margaret Leary and Mom.
Yeah, I took
New
notes.
set of women.
Yeah, more women. So thank you all very much. Don't forget to grab a schedule. Oh, that's right, we passed them out, didn't we? How smart is that? Let's take a look.
Really?
Just so people don't get stuck.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I couldn't change it, but.
Yeah, it was good.
Start working now.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody. I'm sitting the last one about how many grandmothers
Oh,
is that your grandmother?
Yeah, all right.
They got lucky.
thanks for coming.
Always. I love this place. I'm going to be up here more often.
Thanks for coming. Thanks Thanks for coming.
It's been that warm.
I bring my own PC, or you bring a thumb drive and use your PC?
Whichever you prefer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you bring a thumb drive, it's super easy. We just plug it in. But we can work with yours if you would prefer.
All right.
So it is whatever your preference is, okay?
I saw your note and I will get you.
Okay.
Looks like the title's actually set.
Excellent, huh?
Looks like the title is actually set.
Oh,
You
that
had to
can
change the font to smaller and smaller.
I did. I did. No, whatever title you want.
All right, well,
Yeah, no, that way they know what the topic is. It can be whatever title you come up with. Yeah. That's good, Kim. Hi, thanks for coming. Wasn't that good? She does a good job. Tell her she did a great job.
Excuse me, thank you. See where you have rubber guts, it's also a famous
Yes. Oh, Dublin Gross is just the name of the band. Are you talking about on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the name of the band.
The band?
Yes.
I didn't know it was such a thing.
Yeah. You guys are sure you've heard that.
Well, I didn't say I didn't know them,
Yeah.
I just thought that if it's equal to out on the road.
No, that's just the name of the band. That's music. That's
place.
songs.
It's a place.
Well, I know that. That's where they got their name. But that's not the topic.
Oh, no, I don't.
So, I noticed.
I know, I checked it as a person. I didn't want to be like looking at my watch.
I don't want to by the time. I probably would have cut it off, but I never did.
We died. All within like 40, 42.
Dude, I know, I see it. It's so pretty. Kim's like,
I'm going to butter it. How am I stealing Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's fun to be here.
you behaved yourself. Seeing her hold on and you were just out of control. Totally out of control. Seeing her hold there when you're out of control. Well, I was,
you are gonna get it.
Haley Goldby's sister, Jen. He was in this graduate class, but he wasn't at the
And then he had my grandfather.
He graduated in 67, but he knows all the answers. He walked this year, and he's still. So what happened? He's in the boat. He put something in there. You know, all the royalties. You know, all the royalties.
Okay. We'll see you.
She was looking for an article.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. It was It was fun. Kara was looking for information on this. She said, there wasn't anything in the paper. But they have problems. Here, it happened. That was very good. Maria, Sheila's got a picture up there. So Murray, I'm gonna have your picture up there. Do a story on you and your group of gals.
The building in the corner across the station.
Yeah, that's the, yeah, and she's also associated with Murray, so if you walk by there, it has tiling on the front there, and it says Murray.
On this side of the street, or
You're along, you're down.
I'm hitting.
There you go.
Hey,
All right.
so there. Well, that was good.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, you did a good job. That was very good. I didn't mean to embarrass you by writing down stuff, but you wouldn't have said it if somebody else. I don't know the geological history of Silver Bow Creek. No. I don't know. Well, he's a rock guy, so I'm sure he's probably not digging about it. Straddle lane. I don't know. It depends on where he's at, Silver Bow Creek, because a lot of it's yeah. That's all, what do you call Silver Bow Creek? Where does it start and where does it end? Yeah. Right, I think it was a swamp that hit the well, I think it ran off the hill like everything else. The meadows down here and whatever got high enough floated downstream and that became a creek. All the smelters do all that. Well, yeah, then you got the smelters. They use storage. You wanted the water and they needed storage. So they did both. How are you? Well, thanks.
No, you're fine. Carrying around weird stuff.
Trying to make a complex. First proposal, we're going to vote.
Oh, really?
Well, then you start sending out those.
There's one thing.
Well, they start. You retired by that. We all got. Yeah, because he got $50 a month. Even though he didn't qualify. He's out there with Joe Carroll. We should have been. Joe says, getting in there at all, you know?
Yeah, he's on
I'm doing my Claudia. Yeah. What needs to go, what needs to stay?
That was good.
You know?
Always good.
As well, he comes after.
I usually do it the following Wednesday. So, yeah, I usually do it ahead of time. And if you subscribe, you'll get a notification that we put,
Yes. We don't know. We gotta figure all that out.
yeah, excellent.
Thanks, Kevin.
You're welcome.
He says, good.
Yeah, but go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube, and then there'll be notifications. Maybe it's your setting. Yeah, but I usually do it the next Wednesday. It's just part of like Wednesdays are brown bag, whether we have a lecture or not. I'm doing it. So I come in next Wednesday, get the camera down, take the chip out, and start it uploading. They do. They do. You, because I get the guff.
We're special ed.
I know you are special
I
ed.
get the guff when somebody sits there. Oh my gosh. So that's for my peace of mind. Hey, happy St. Patrick's Day. I missed it this year.
Speaking of famous women,
Uh-huh.
my mother,
Yes.
and the special ed, she was the special ed driver. Drove the special ed, what was the school up there they tore down? Where the special ed, turned into special ed school. It was right there off of, above Broadway, above, the Broadway garage.
Washington?
Oh, no, Grant.
No, it wasn't the, it was.
Washington.
And
Washington?
that was special ed school.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So
Okay.
she got a job bus driving because she knew where Alfonso had the buses.
Yeah.
Good friend of hers. So she called herself the retarded bus driver.
Somebody had told me.
Can't use that word now.
You can't use that word.
The R word.
Yeah,
is-
we came from a time of social inappropriate
Yes,
all the
you
time.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know where your heart's at, so it's okay. Thanks for coming,
Well, thanks for-
always, always.
It's always, but thanks for what you do.
Yeah, it's been good.
Did you get your refrigerator schedules? Okay.
The next one's gonna be good too. That's
Yes,
exciting.
David's been working on that collection.
Piper.
David Armstrong, he was, sit back here,
Okay.
big tall guy, that comes in. He has been working on the Piper collection for a long, long time. And, so I'm really interested in hearing that one.
Didn't he work for the company?
He might have. Probably,
There was some Piper work.
yeah. Oh, Dave Piper, yeah, Piper did. Yeah, and Dick Gibson, we're getting Gibson back. So, yeah, it's gonna be fun. They are.
It's like, I don't know if I'll ever meet them all, and if I can't, if I do, I will remember their names.
Are they around here?
Some of them are in Portland, one of them is in Canada, one of them is over on the west side of the Rockies somewhere. Eight of them are boys. Oh, last man's Irish boys. So, we will see. But right now, it feels like this is probably the love of my life. I'm always afraid to say that because of my history.
Yeah.
Like you're waiting for a shoe to drop. Hopefully someday I'll get past that.
And how's little Charlie doing?
I don't know. Charlie cost me $1,500 just recently. He has 16 teeth pulled. Oh gosh. Yes, his mouth is almost empty except for the 2 teeth and 1 lopsided canine, which is where the vet said needs to come out, but she wouldn't take it out because his jaw is so porous now that she was afraid she'd break his jaw. And she said, you really need to go to a vet in Missoula, a doggy dentist in Missoula or Bozeman to have this stuff. And I'm looking at the dog and I'm thinking, this dog is 14 years old. As long as, the only reason I had his teeth pulled is because his breath was so bad, he was so infected, it was just, he couldn't bear to have it. Actually, the teeth that are left are his chewing teeth. So now I mix canned food with kibble, so he gets some crunch on that, and I'm feeding him these as more as a treat, not a steady diet, but these large dental kibbles that are big, yeah, they clean and they're large on purpose, so he has to chew them. And yeah, and he, I don't think I'm going to have that cane. I'm going to do my best to keep his mouth from getting infected. I don't, number one, well, I can't keep affording these dental. But, that's what it is. So, when I sell the property, maybe I'll think about it. But when you think about it, a dog his age going under anesthesia, which is what's relatively young, but he's not paralyzed or anything, so. Just see if there's some other symptoms. But clearly he's getting.
That's a little bit. There's be a golden retriever.
Yeah, the smaller dogs can take a bit longer, but that's still pretty old. And he now refuses to, he can't get up on my bed unless I lift him. Used to be that I had something he could jump up to and then I get him. I won't let him love dogs. I love him. But no longer having a housemaid on had him while my daughter wanted to go somewhere.
Yeah.
They have to take Charlie everywhere, and that's just, and it doesn't work. Especially in this country. It's really too cold. So. Well, it's good seeing you, Suzanne. Yes,
We'll have to get together and have
yes, I would love that.
Yeah.
Get back from your wanderings.
Yeah.
It should be fine by the time you get back to that,
Yeah.
I would think. So you're leaving when?
First Friday in April, so I've got another 2 weeks, still another 2 weeks here.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get some artwork done for the gallery we're having a show. We all have these 11 by 11 little wood blocks that we're doing something on, so I'm working on some collages for that.
Oh, I got you here. I don't hang on to your last names, or got the first names down. But could you tell me Michelle's last name?
Van Dyne.
E-A-N.
D-A-N-D, and then words D-Y-N-E.
Oops, I'm done. And then, I don't remember Eva's last name, because I see her all the time. It was
Curry, C-U-R-R-Y.
Okay, I have everybody else. So can you say his names down? She and her husband took dance class the last session. They're not this time because
Oh.
they're traveling so much, but
Even a day, yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I'd like to take some dance classes. We signed up for another dance class this
Uh-huh.
winter, but I've missed so many of those classes.
Well-
and now I can't, I'm kind of worth it.
I really love the country two-step that Dave is teaching at, Sabino is teaching at the Elks.
Oh, okay.
And-
Tuesday, right. Thank you, that was great. I really enjoyed that talk.
Good, I'm glad you did. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It's a dance that works for a lot of different kinds of music,
Uh-huh.
and
empowering Latinx teens all across LA. Now, I'm looking back at that time in an unsolved murder that got blamed on the scene. I'm Lindsay Mulcahy, host of a new podcast.